Greetings and welcome back. Long time no here. Long time there has been an interview on my channel. However, today I am exceptionally pleased to bring you none other than the inimitable that Chad Pete you always invite to interviews. And I think it's going to be an interesting interview. Lots of questions I want to pose to him, or interesting topics. But in particular, because I sincerely, people are saying I'm always filleting him, and you're going to find out in the interview why I think he actually has one of the best YouTube channels out there. Flat out, I'm not even exaggerating. So the point I'd like to start on regarding this is because it's going to tie into a major issue I'd like to discuss with you. And I think it actually ties into one of your great strengths as a person. We're going to go back to that moment in which I like to describe it as the epic moment in which you slew Chad Williamson in single combat in the comment section, so to speak. Um, that discussion, and I think it's even more relevant because Chad Williamson appeared on Wheat Waffles, which really surprised me. I mean, absolutely no disrespect to Wheat Waffles whatsoever. I think it's a technically a very competent channel. But I just always would have assumed that, it would have been quote unquote too lowbrow for a guy like Chad Williamson, but whatever. And so for a record, any criticism I'm about to offer of Chad Williamson, I think he seems like a nice guy, unironically. Yeah, I really think that. However, he did that interview with that other guy, that Chad Light guy, and it was all about confidence this, confidence that. And you actually, better to hear it from the horse's mouth. You left a comment in which I think was very relevant. So why don't you tell us about that little interaction there?
Sure, sure. Well, for starters, thanks for having me, Stars. Always good to be here. Um, yeah, and just so you understand how Wheat Waffles landed the interview with Chris Williamson, Wheat knows Hamza, Hamza knows Chris. Through Hamza, he got the interview with Chris, and that's
Ah,
how he did it. It's all
ah,
about who you know, right? That's how it goes with everything in life.
indeed, indeed.
Social circle maxing. So,
Hmm.
so basically, admittedly, I didn't really watch it in depth. Like I skimmed the interview.
I watched the whole thing.
Take what I'm about to. So you could probably say that probably I hit it on the nose without even watching it. So take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt. However, basically, I look at it like, okay, um, you're a good-looking guy. You're tall. You're this. You're that. Anyone who is relatively well versed in black pill lexicon and topics, which are grounded primarily in evolutionary psych and evolutionary biology and stuff like this. With some bells and whistles missing that could be filled in with Evo psych literature. Um, this guy's talking about confidence. When we know that confidence stems from competence, which then begets confidence and begets competence, and this comes from a positive Matthew effect loop. But what if you have a negative Matthew effect death spiral? I would be more interested in seeing a guy who comes from that against all odds still exhibit the same confidence that a Chad does. And I basically pointed that out and said that would make for more compelling radio. That would make for more compelling discussion because then a sub 5 can look at it and be like, how the hell did this guy do that? Like, I need to know. But I think, again, when you are a sub 5 and you're watching this, it just kind of reads like a bunch of platitudes where you're just telling me, like, oh, just be confident. Oh, like I never thought of that? And we kind of had a back and forth. And he said something to the effect of, well, this channel's not for you. That's kind of like
That's
his.
his famous slogan. Every time you
That's
offer, he always says that.
that's kind of
Yeah,
like his dismissal, right?
yeah.
And then I replied, I'm like, you spoke to William Costello, all right? You spoke to him. He told you what the problem was. Have you forgotten that conversation already? Like that's still a thing.
Oh, they're friends with
And
each other too. Yeah.
yeah. And then he tells me, well, would you agree that the only difference between the sub 5 and the chat is that, the starting line is further back for the sub 5? And I'm like, of course, which is why his story of overcoming and being confident in spite of that would be more compelling. Like that was the whole point,
Yep.
right? And yeah, and I did watch bits and pieces of his interview with Wheat Waffles where he talks about bullying and stuff like this. Chads are not immune to this type of stuff. I know this. And two, just because he's a Chad today doesn't mean he was a Chad in high school.
Yeah.
I know this as well, right? There's no shortage of nerds that just became Chads after the fact because their facial structure and all that stuff developed as they matured biologically. So I get it, man. And honestly, he's a genuine guy. But I think also because he's a Chad, his experience in life nowadays is more closer to the female experience than it is to the average male experience. And as a result of that, he's kind of out of touch with what guys like me go through, and certainly what guys like, sub fives go through. Like,
Yeah.
it's no mistake that these types of people congregate like normies in the black pill lexicon, not the
Yeah,
neurotypical.
I know.
You know
I
what I'm
know.
saying? We have
Yeah,
to
yeah.
clarify that.
Right, we do, but
Average
yeah.
average looking guys.
Hmm.
I guess for us talking, we'll say average looking guys,
Nice.
average Joes, and
Yeah,
plain Janes.
yeah.
These kind of people, they gravitate towards red pill for a reason, because these
No.
people, they can kind of do their non-physical stuff to get a more easy positive Matthew effect loop. So they can get to confidence and competence without really having to think too much about like things like hard looks maxing or geo maxing or escort maxing and things like this. While the sub five, as Chris pointed out, further back starting line, that person, to get their positive Matthew effect loop going, they have to, you know, look at something a little more tangible and physical. But someone who's a Chad can't even begin to fathom what that's like. This guy just rolls out of bed and he's on the cover of romance novels and he's on Love Island UK. Different life. He can't
Well,
understand unless he makes a conscious effort, which
and
is,
that's kind of the crux of the matter. I noticed that,
mhm,
for all of him sort of dismissing people, and I've heard that, I get this too, and I offer, well, this channel isn't for you, and then I say, actually, it is. You taught. I'm very
great
interested in
stuff.
evolutionary biology and psychology. I have been probably, I put probably longer than Chris has. I've been at it for,
Mhm.
so maybe it is. You do these interviews I find really interesting. However,
Yeah,
but and in the wheat during the wheat waffles interview, actually, kind of you can tell that what annoys him is that people aren't sort of acknowledging his struggle. I guess people want their struggle to be acknowledged. It's just that, as
that's
you pointed
everyone.
out, yeah, everyone wants that. It's just a feeling of recognition of, that you exist, basically. Not, of
Mhm.
course, it hasn't only been easy for him, but I totally agree with you. It would be more compelling at the same time. Nobody, it's just there's a reason we don't see a sub five, or even a guy who's just really, a guy who's 5'4", bragging about all his, well, not, maybe not bragging, but talking about his all achievements and the books that he's written, because it's vanishingly uncommon. And if you could get someone like that, that would be really compelling, because it would be more relatable for one, for a lot of people. Because I've listened, I mean, some of the things on his channel I genuinely like listening to, because I just think the topic, that he had a biologist on who's a specialist in testosterone, things like that. Sometimes it's just he gets some guy on. I've got his name, Galloway, some fancy schmancy business guy, and it's just these platitudes. Basically, the guy says, if you want to be successful, you need to try, try, try. And 90% of everything is failure, which is mathematically impossible, by the way. When you're a multi-millionaire and you're in your 50s and you have a hot wife and a kid, there's no way you failed 90% of the time, right? It's just hyperbole, right?
Right.
And that's the problem. Now, maybe in that sense, Chris is right that, if the channel isn't for, sub fives or average Joe schmoes. But I think this is really one of the major issues I wanted to bring up with you, because I think it really plays upon one of your greatest strengths and why I think you have one of the best channels on YouTube. It's something to do with your personality. Now, I don't know
Okay.
how long you've been paying attention to the things I say. I use this term, the problem of self-extrapolation. Now, on some level, we all have to do this, because we're all just a consciousness that's cut off from another consciousness. There's no real experience. There's only one experience as Pete, and there's only experience as myself, and we can't just swap each other's experiences out. However, there is a problem beyond that, and that baseline is the baseline. But for a lot of people, especially successful people, what ends up happening is their baseline becomes their sole perspective and interpretation of the world, and then they project it onto other people. And so they're in a state of shock. And I'll bring up a good example of this. A guy I've talked to a number of times on a server I know. He used to be a mathematics professor. I don't know. If I were to guess, he probably has somewhere between a 145, 150, hyper intelligent, one of the elites, right? He quit a year or two ago. Now he's working for the military industrial complex, earning over $1 million a year, doing weird complex equations neither of us probably would understand. You get it, right?
I
And
get it.
but he lives in the LA area, and we're having this conversation about homelessness in urban areas, specifically in LA. And I always get frustrated with this guy, because I think when you're that smart, it's kind of almost solipsistic. He kept on saying, "I don't get these homeless people. If I were in their shoes, I would be doing X." And I try to point out the guy. Okay, but no, no. If you were literally in their shoes, first off, let's drop about three freaking standard equations of IQ, maybe even more, but we'll be generous. And let's add some drug addiction, take your pick of whichever one to it. Do you really think it says, I would be responsible? I would do this. But you're you can't do that. You're not the same person. So I said to the guy, yes, I believe if you through some freak accident became homeless, within a week you would get a coding job or something. Yeah, you would be doing something. You wouldn't be a drug-addled addict, taking a dump in the park. But this is my problem with people in general, and that's why I think it's such this. If there's any issue, I think that is the top issue that afflicts our interpersonal communication. It's this: we self-extrapolate from ourselves, we project onto the people, other people, and we have to do this to some degree because we're stuck in our own heads. It's obvious, but to have enough wisdom, and it's because I don't think it's intelligence, but to have enough wisdom to recognize that your baseline, whatever that baseline might be, maybe you're a, hyper genius mathematics professor, or you're 6'4" in your case, or whatever it might be, that baseline is not necessarily, and in many cases, not at all representative of other people's experiences. And then to take that wisdom and at least attempt in your own head, even though you ultimately fail because we're trapped in our own heads, to simulate that experience for yourself. And that is something, Pete, that I think is an exceptional strength of yours. I think that you just do a bang up job on your channel because you actually take the time to understand what it at least potentially might be like for somebody else rather than to assume, as a lot of smart, really smart people do, as I just demonstrated, that your baseline is somehow the baseline of other people. And I can give you, I have a friend who's just equally just hyper and hyper until off the charts. And I actually had to train him, even though I'm considerably dumber than he is, because he used to tutor people and he would just not understand why people weren't getting the material. And I said, and this guy's literally, again, he's 145 IQ. You do realize that most people don't have a 145 IQ. If they're struggling to get the material, if they take longer, if it's not obvious to them, there are reasons for that. And oh, I never really thought of that. Because so
Yeah.
this is how people are. This is how people operate. And I think and I don't know whether it's an environmental thing. That's what I'm going to ask you, because I know one of the stories you've told a lot frequently is that you had a nice kind of healthy, sane household between your father and your mother, but your closest friend you grew up with basically had a broken home. So
Yeah.
maybe it's because I look at it the same way. I've worked blue collar jobs with some dumbass folk. No offense to them, just kind of objectively just weren't very bright. And I've also been, at least temporarily, in academia, working with some of the brightest people out there and everything in between. And so maybe it's just I've just been exposed to just a greater spectrum of human beings that I just never assumed that I'm the baseline or that people are just even and sometimes remotely similar to each other. So I'm curious how you manage to swing that because if there's any trait you have that I respect the most, it's probably that. And you really put that into your channel. I think it's why your channel is just such a good channel ultimately.
Yeah. I think honestly, from the onset of the channel, I wasn't always like that. Definitely not. But when you have enough people dropping into your comment section saying like, "No, that's not it. No, that's not it." Eventually you have to be like, "All right, I'm doing something wrong here." I mean, in red pill circles, we talk about female solipsism all the time,
Mm,
right? This idea that nobody calls them out, nobody tells them anything because they want to smash. So they think like, "Hey, like they're really deep in solipsism, but men are not immune to solipsism. Even though folks like Rollo Tomasi never talk about male solipsism, we're humans too. We're guilty of this also, to a lesser extent, perhaps, because we don't have people, gassing us up. But yeah, I mean, when you have enough people who live a different experience coming to you and saying, "Hey, man, like really check this out, look into it," you start acknowledging it. And I think honestly, the bridge is empathy because you said it yourself. Even someone like Chad Williamson, at the end of the day, just wants to be acknowledged that his problems exist, that they are problems, that you can't just sweep them under the rug. And the reality is, like a sub 5 just has more problems, comparatively speaking. So empathy, I think, is the main is the secret sauce. Developing the faculties to be empathetic. Um, I have found that the black pill part of the manosphere has been very receptive to that. Like they look at me and they're like, yeah, he doesn't look like me. Yeah, he has advantages over me, but at least he's trying to get it, and I can respect that. But again, it's not easy to do because, again, like you said, you kind of have to get out of your own skin and try to understand the world from the perspective of another person. Okay, so like I understand why you're angry. I understand why you're sad and things like this. And I understand that the starting line to kind of get to that point where you can kind of get out of that nihilistic valley, as Turd Fling Monkey calls it, get out of that nihilistic valley and get to a point where you can, digest this information and just sort of get to a better place mentally. I understand that's going to be a taller order for you than it is for me, and so on and so forth. And I think when you have that mindset instead of like this solipsistic, like, hey, everything must be the way I live it, I think that just makes for better content. But that being said, I also do share my experience on my channel as well. So I try to keep it balanced. Like, look, this is what I live, and this is what I understand from what you guys are telling me. And we try to just kind of put it all together to get a more complete picture. And so far, that formula has worked for me. So that's kind of how I do it. Empathy. That's the secret sauce.
Yeah, but I think that that's kind of the point. Even if it's involuntary, I think a lot of people, I mentioned particularly hyper intelligent people, but not just them, they live in their own bubbles, and so the kind of empathy that you would expect, at least potentially, or at least encourage, you're talking about, just isn't there. It's just sort of this state of what the hell? I mean, recently on Chad Williams' interview with that woman, the biologist who studies testosterone, she was talking about, I guess, trans men, right? So women who transitioned, right, who get on, you know, synthetic testosterone, and just how essentially it warps their minds, and they all of a sudden they're just, they're hypersexualized, and they just kind of they realize what it's like. I think when we talk about sort of female solipsism, it really spot on. It's just they cannot imagine or fathom what it is, what it's like for the average guy, because they're not paying attention to that guy. Certainly sub fives are not. They only see the, the cream of the crop. So yeah, but I think that maybe it is then the willingness to be empathetic, and that's because maybe potentially most people could imagine what it's like. But I always try to look for analogies. So I don't know. I have a friend who gets really bad migraines. I don't think I've ever had one in my life, maybe once. But I have other things that kind of cripple me. So I try to imagine, well, he's kind of in and out of work. He can't really work frequently. It's just a mess up situation because it's chronic. It's like, well, I can relate to it in terms of my sleep. Maybe it's not exactly the same thing. I think it's just there is in general a lack of desire to empathize with people. And of course, there's that you'll see it in the manosphere in particular, but Chad Williams, this does sort of encourage people and say, well, at the end of the day, you still need to put in the work and the effort, even if the situation sucks. And yeah, I agree, you kind of do. But my big thing, and this is a conclusion I've come to in recent months, is that to create the positive Matthew effect loop, and I assume everyone in the audience kind of knows what that is, Matthew effect, to those who have, all shall be given; to those who have not, all shall be taken. At some point in time, if there are enough failures, say with an anti-Matthew effect, then you need some kind of intervention. You're not going to be able to do it on your own. This is the conclusion I've come to. I've seen too many examples of guys who there just wasn't enough of it, and it builds up, and failure begets failure, and you would really need somebody to intervene directly to try to create that. And even then, it's very difficult. And so this, of course, ties into ideas like survivorship bias. Survivorship bias exists on both ends of the spectrum, the success end as well as the failure end. It's just the failure end you don't really hear much about. Um, so, and that's why I'm a little bit black-pilled on the on the idea that some of these guys who are in that negative Matthew effect loop or anti-Matthew effect loop, they can really get out because I don't think there's going to be that intervention that they really require. You being kind of hyper self-aware, another strength of yours, I'd say, that, as you mentioned many times in your channel, you caught your lucky break getting out of that pharmacy job, eventually becoming a CPA. Without that, who knows how you would have ended up, right? There was a trigger that led to something positive, and we just have to acknowledge there are many cases of people who are unsuccessful, whether they're sub fives or average or otherwise, where that trigger event never occurs. And it just builds up, and then you end up in the opposite camp. And maybe in that sense, Chad Williams was right on. Maybe that channel isn't for them. But if I think if people, society, whatever, broadly want to help individuals like that, they need to recognize that there actually needs to be some kind of intervention that's going to do something. Otherwise, it's just going to continue, right? It's really hard, and I speak from personal experience after a lot of failure, to muster the energy all on your own and try it again and say, I'll give it the heave ho again, and then again and again and again. I would argue, and even Chad Williams acknowledged this in an interview he did. He said, I think I'm paraphrasing. At some point in time, all the discipline you engage in needs to pay off in something, right? If it pays off in nothing, even the most robust, disciplined individual is eventually going to crumble because people don't like doing something for a long period of time and getting nothing in return, right? And I think that's really the key thing here. There needs to be some kind of positive intervention in people's lives. And yes, they need to make an effort, obviously. But I've known guys who made a lot of effort and, still just never goes anywhere. And then I just think, well, I don't know what could be done. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is kind of what I call life beating you into submission, right?
Well phrased.
And
Yep.
yeah. So I mean, I've been there. Um, but I'd say yes, I think people underestimate luck and how important luck really is, right? But again, you have to take what I call like a locus inventory. Like you have to differentiate between what you can control and what you can't control. And of course, between you and I, what we mean is what does the genetic puppeteer allow, right? Given my genetic code and all my dispositions, what can I actually do? What can't I do? Be mindful of that. But just looking at the situation, yes, you do have to have that lucky break. But I think often nowadays, because of the atomization of society, where everyone's kind of like shut off in their own little world, the odds of somebody else just coming along and intervening, there's no sense of community anymore in the West. So this is why the mental health business is booming. I know you have your reservations about that, but for me, I realize that when you're getting beaten into submission by life, the other part of it that a lot of people don't talk about, they just kind of bury it, is that there's a lot of trauma associated with that. How much rejection can you take? How many terrible life events can you take before you break? It's okay to break. It's what makes you human. It's your natural, evolved response to outside stressors in order to ensure survival. I think I've spoken with Sean Kahn about this. And we've kind of gone back and forth on the idea like, yeah, well, there's a reason why things like depression and pessimism evolved. Because one guy's like, oh, I'm going to go out and hunt the woolly mammoth in like, 50 degrees below zero. And the other guy's like, no, screw that, man. That's a dumb idea. And he's like, that's not going to be good. And he kind of has a negative, pessimistic view of it. Like, there's reasons these things evolved. So, yes, it has its uses. But the thing is, in a modern, cushy environment, these things don't really have as much of a practical use anymore. And as a result of that, you have a lot of people who just sort of have this evolutionary mismatch with the society they live in. And in my experience, personally, therapy kind of did the trick for me. It doesn't for everybody. And there's also different types. Like, for example, I was talking to Human about this. For a more creative person, cognitive behavioral therapy probably works because it's like thinking outside the box, messing with things, seeing what makes it tick. While someone like you or me might do something more like psychodynamic, where it's like, all right, why am I thinking this way? Why does this make me feel this way? Really getting to the root of it, and then when you get to the root of it, then maybe you could start actually addressing these traumas you endured. But the first step is to actually acknowledge you were hurt in the first place. I think this is why in the manosphere, yes, ad hominem is ad hominem. We're not going to act like it's not. But when a girl says, who hurt you, right? A lot of dudes do get triggered because the reality is somebody did. But it's like, can you acknowledge that? Can you acknowledge that there's a chink in the armor and we got to like patch that up? I think that's like the first thing. But getting to that point where you have to acknowledge like, okay, maybe I do need to talk to somebody, it can be very difficult to get the motivation to do that when life has repeatedly shown you that all you have to show for your life is just negative results. And I get that. This is why when I was in the pharmacy, I was just drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking, just thinking somehow one day there'd be a light in sight. And not everybody ever sees that light, but luck ultimately is what got my positive Matthew effect loop going. And even after I got that job, I was still in the trenches drinking. It wasn't until I actually forced an intervention and actually went to therapy, which, mind you, was my third attempt at therapy. But
Right.
I think really what was different this time is that I was honest. I was honest and I was fully open. And I just told her from the get go, I was like, look, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do it my way. But I will be 100% honest with you. I'll tell you everything. And then we could hash it out together. And most of the time at these sessions, it's just me talking and just like thinking out loud. And if there's any like flaws in what I'm putting together, she'll kind of point it out too, and then we bounce back and forth. And then usually by the end, I'm like, all right, I think I feel better about this and I can do something about it. But again, William Costello is trying to solve this problem. He's like, all right, again, empathy is the key, right? Acknowledge that they have a unique set of circumstances. Obviously, having a background in EvoPsych and not subscribing exclusively to the social science model works. Again, the intervention is one of those things that has to be forced now because we're all so cut off from each other. And I don't think the pandemic helped affairs either. So
Yeah.
it's a multifaceted issue. It's not something where it's like, hey, we can go to one cause. Very much how like you pointed out to me, in terms of like dispositions, they're polygenic. It could be multiple genes that play a role in why this is what it be.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, but getting out of the negative loop is acknowledging you're in one in the first place, which I
Yeah.
don't think is the difficult part for
No,
many.
there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I say at the outset, I don't want to turn this into another discussion about free will, but my view, as you're probably aware, is that everything in life comes down to luck. You don't choose the genes you're born, your environment,
Nope.
even your. So it's really just life is just from top to bottom, just kind of luck. But that's a kind of a semi-separate discussion. But yeah, regarding I mean, the chink, obviously, I mean, this idea that I don't, I mean, I've never said nobody when women in particular make that accusation in a sort of manosphere context historically, it's it's more an accusation of you're engaging in the wrong thing or you're retarded or just kind of there's something wrong with you and the reason why is because somebody hurt you. Now you think these strange things. I think
Mhm.
it's kind of glaringly obvious. Very few people seek to understand something if nothing's gone wrong for them, right? Usually, failure begets the desire to understand something because you want to understand why you're failing. If everything's just been a resounding success, throughout your life, then you're not going to really take the time to investigate why it has been that way. But I think the thing, I mean, I have my reservations with sort of therapy or sort of modern psychology. In part, you mentioned it. I mean, it's all based on this very, how should we put it, ideologically driven, even if the individual practitioners of it are not so driven ideologically driven view that man is basically a blank slate. There's all social science, the way things are run these days.
Correct.
But also, honestly, if you're in that bad a spot, the fact that you have to then shell out money to get someone to talk to you in its own right is a kind of defeat, right? It's like, wait, you're so low down on the totem pole that you can't even get a friend to talk to you. So what you're going to do is just go see a therapist who's basically a conversation mercenary, essentially.
Yeah, yeah,
And
and I think again, this is because of the atomization. No social circles, no GF, none of that. Yeah, it messes you up. But again, what I've been trying to do with women in particular is like, and my therapist was pretty receptive to this. Like I told her, like, it's not just social constructionism, right? And she's like, of course. I'm like, okay, you understand that like you're like actually acknowledging something that most people in your field will not acknowledge. She's like, yeah. I'm like, all right, cool. But when I talk to women, I'm like, okay, I want you to imagine what it's like to be told no. Can you do that? And they're like, well, that would suck. I'm like, yes. Now imagine being told no most of the time. Oh, that wouldn't be too good. No, it wouldn't be too good. And you try to just explain to them that like it's a very different experience. I always say, 40% of men have reproduced, 80% of women could say the same. So when a man gets rejected, it's like, okay, I'm in the bottom 60%. I'm in the majority. Okay, it's not that bad, right? But when you reject a woman, she's like, I'm in the bottom 20. Ugh, that sucks. Like that's like why they get very insulted. Um, so it's a very different experience. but you try to help them like understand it's like, look, this guy's going through rage and depression because he's angry that he's been lied to. And yes, he's going to lash out. Yes, he's going to say some incendiary stuff. But I promise you that once he processes all this like trauma and stuff that I'm talking about, he will be in a better place. And I can say it because I've lived it and I've processed it. And I can tell you, your disposition towards the opposite sex improves once you actually just sort of get through the emotions. But the key from the female angle, I would say, is empathy, which, of course, they operate from solipsism, and a lot of them would rather just say who hurt you than have the discussion. But you are correct, though, that most in the psychology space, people like William Costello and my therapist are a minority, right? Like, most therapists, you ask them, do you know who David Buss is? And they're like, I think someone mentioned that in passing somewhere. Like, they don't really know. So I
No.
think William Costello has the right idea. First, acknowledging that there are, biological factors to talk about here. I think again that'd be more receptive. But the women thing, I don't know if we're ever gonna get that en masse. And supposedly they have the greater capacity for empathy, allegedly. So it's like,
Well, I have a lot. I mean, yes, they have
like
a
I
great.
said, allegedly,
Well,
with an
I think
asterisk.
they do for children and other women. I think absolutely, but just that it's not applied across the board to men. I mean, I don't think women have much empathy whatsoever for men, unless there's some rare
If they
cases.
want him, unless
If
they want him.
sometimes then, but even then, if he, if he, I'm of the view that a man can only show so much failure in the face of a woman, or
Oh
for a
yeah,
woman. So maybe okay, a son, a mother with a son, of course, she has endless, potentially at least, not my mother, but potentially endless empathy. Um, and maybe extrapolating from that, because I've seen a lot of women be like that girl writes what, who I don't know whatever happened to her, but she was one of those women years ago who had sons, and yeah, I mean, you think, well, maybe it's not that easy, but in general, no, I think women are empathetic towards other women and children. That's kind of what they specialize in, but not really so
yeah,
much in men because we're there to be tested and found quote unquote worthy of reproduction or not, and that's not a position where you can extend empathy really. It's just a position of whether is this person worthy or not, and it
yeah.
is what it is, as you like to say.
But But every once in a while, you do get someone like Karen Strawn, right?
Girl
Every
writes what?
once
Yeah,
in
Sharon Sean. Yeah.
a like every once in a while, you get something like that. But what sucks is it's every once in a while. It's like the lucky break, right? It's like, okay, fine, someone's speaking up, but not enough people are. And this is why I think again you kind of have this whole male disposability thing that Spetsnaz talked about
Mm,
all the time back in the day. Again, we live in a society. I've said this before. Women, as long as they maintain themselves, they have their looks, their main agency. But beauty fades, dumb is forever, as Judge Judy likes to say. But they have their own money now, and they have their own status. So all the things that men used to bring to the evolutionary contract, they get it themselves. So they turn to men, and their attitude just oozes. Well, you can't do anything for me. You're just a utility. So keep doing the lights, keep doing the plumbing, keep doing the construction, and just sit down and shut up. And that seems to be the sentiment. And men are just kind of like, nah, like we're not going to sign on for this. So yeah, huge disconnect between the sexes in modern times.
yeah, I mean,
Huge disconnect.
it's astonishing when you think about it. I mean, William Costello's brought this point up as well, but I think it probably is
Hmm.
accurate that for for vast expanses of time, women were probably copulating and reproducing with men they didn't even particularly fancy. I mean, apart
Yeah.
from the utility they were bringing to the table, I mean, they needed it, but
Yeah.
they weren't really into them. As
No.
Rollo Tomas said, you can't negotiate desire. Well, they probably didn't desire them, but they think, well, it's better than nothing. And I think the chickens come home to roost. I mean, I think now we're seeing the reality as it actually stands. And
Yeah.
you know, you can. The thing about evolutionary psychology, though, I think, as someone who's had an amateur interest for quite some time now,
Mm.
is it can definitely lead you, and I'm no exception here. I think I'm very much a victim of it, to be very reductionist in your thinking. And I can't really think of relationships outside of a sort of a point basis. Okay, so she's bringing this, he's bringing that. It makes sense. Oh, is this a sort of mating? It's not. Um, I think back. I was years and years ago. I was together with this Korean girl, and I gained a bunch of weight. And she didn't want to boink me anymore. At the
Yeah.
time, this was years ago, before like the internet wasn't really a big thing. Basically, I didn't know, right? why doesn't she want to boink me anymore? I mean, it just didn't even occur to me. I mean, I can't obviously being overweight wasn't great, but I didn't think at the time. Yeah, being overweight is unattractive, and being unattractive is associated with poor genetic health. And like these days, it's completely different. Even if I were hypothetically to even want a relationship, and I don't think that's really accessible to me, I, I would just look at it in those terms. And when people ask me, especially normies, like, I mean, in the old sense of normie, so what do you think about a relationship? I can't help, even with my autism, to go through an inventory. Like, okay, so you're that tall and she's that tall. What do you do for a living? Like, just go through, because that's just how I think we are wired. We don't like to reduce it down to that, but it's a big part of it. And so I do
Yeah.
one thing. I mean, I'm entertained. I don't know how likely it is, but it's possible I might be able to get William Costello on the channel. I'm not promising anything, but it would be interesting if I were to. But my question, of course, would be, okay, you have a psychologist or a therapist who is aware of English and psychology. Well, how's that actually going to help you? I'm saying that being aware of these things, sure, isn't necessarily going to give you what you need, the building blocks, if you will, to get where you want to
No,
go. That
no,
might,
but it gives you the ability to empathize.
yep, that's true. That's true. I think, but that's my personal issue with therapy. I've done it a few times in my life, certainly not recently. Let's say I were to go to say I'm going to go see a therapist now. I mean, I could tell them everything and I could predict what they'd say, but I would just say, probabilistically speaking, given my situation in life, my age, my limitations, how likely is this? And that's how I look at things. And they would be all probably wishy-washy, and I I don't know. I just don't see how it could possibly be helpful. And in particular, the idea of sort of hiring a mercenary. I'm fortunate, at least online, to have friends I can talk to that I don't need to, pay by the hour.
Right.
So I think, well, yeah, I guess a therapist could offer a different perspective. I'm sure they have some skills they acquired that aren't commonplace, otherwise they wouldn't be a therapist. But
Yeah.
it's
But I
mm,
think having the knowledge you have though puts you at an advantage when you walk in, because someone like you could walk in and say, "Look, CBT is not going to work for me.
mm.
We got to do it some other way. We have to do something else." So there's a lot of people that like they don't even know what their problem is, which I think my first two attempts were kind of like that. I didn't know what my problem is, therefore, how am I going to find a solution? You have to acknowledge the problem. It's the first step. So if you don't know what the problem is, there's nothing to acknowledge. So it's like,
So
oh,
odd to me that somebody. I mean, I guess yeah, maybe an earlier version of me, like when I was overweight with that ex, I didn't realize that was why she didn't want to boink me anymore. You know, and
yeah,
it just so I guess if you're just I mean, it is shocking just how norm. It's just I mean, I hate using the term. It's almost cringe because neurotypical, whatever. They're just. It's like the lights are completely out in some respects. It's amazing. Whereas I don't know how to fix them because I don't think they're fixable. But I think a lot of I know pretty much where my problems lie.
yeah.
Um,
But in their world, they don't need to be fixed. Again, I think in Black Pill space, they talk about this all the time. They say there's no looks maxing for your brain, right? So it's this idea that neurotypical people, they really just go through the motions and things just sort of organically unfold. Like that's just sort of how it goes. They can't appreciate the luck that's operating with them, how naturally they form social circles, how naturally, as a result of forming those social circles, they get a GF and stuff like this. But in terms of the whole the relationship dynamic, I mean, I look at it like, listen, if a girl rejects me, again, 40% of men, I'm in the 60%. I take it like the sun is hot and the sky is blue, which has helped me a great deal not take it as personally. Um, and honestly, I don't envy women on the other side when they face rejection because that's basically them being told you're in the 20%, which I think hurts a lot more than being told you're in the 60%, right?
yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of one thing. But another thing I look at it is like one of probably the only positive of a deregulated sex market I can think of is that people can actually be with who they genuinely desire, provided the two people genuinely desire each other. But what do we get? We get a mismatch of a bunch of chicks swiping on Tinder for guys who don't want them. And then the guys who genuinely desire them, they don't genuinely desire. So it becomes very difficult to kind of get that match, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But yeah, but at the end of the day, um, there is that. But my personal take on relationships, like, do I spend all my time just thinking about evolutionary psychology literature if I'm talking to a girl? No. Perhaps that's a luxury of being an average Joe. That being said, I think primarily if I am interacting with a girl, priority one is to actually enjoy it. Otherwise, why the hell am I doing it? That's kind of how I look at it. But obviously, if things come up and there's problems and speed bumps, yes, we have a plethora of resources that can help us understand why the speed bumps are there. And then you can kind of do a cost benefit analysis. Is this worth addressing? Should I kind of just, write it off, move on to the next girl or something like this? But again, most guys, maybe you can argue, don't have the luxury to do things like that. I don't think even I have the luxury to do it, but I just don't care whether I have the luxury to do it because now I kind of subscribe similarly to like a woman's view where it's like, hear me out, where, hey, I'd rather have no pizza than crap pizza. William Costello says it. For most men, there's pizza and then there's good pizza. They don't care. They'll eat pizza, right? And whatever it takes to get pizza, they'll get it. While women would rather have no pizza than have crappy pizza. And that's kind of the libido desire gap between us. But I've kind of adopted a view like, nah, I'd rather have no pizza than crap pizza because I mean, I've had no pizza for 13 plus years and I've been getting along just fine, focusing on other things, and my life has been getting better in the absence of women entirely. So obviously, it's a proof of concept. I can do it. So, priority one, I would say, when interacting with opposite sex for me is just enjoy it. But if I'm not enjoying it and it's actually being a detriment, just don't be afraid to cut it off. Easier said than done, especially from the view of a sub five, perhaps. But that's probably self extrapolation on my part. Yeah.
well, you always want what you can't have. Well, you don't always want that, but it's a frequent thing. Right? You
Yeah.
want what you can't have. What it just yeah. And I think the Alex Date site made a video a while back where it was going over the data and what a real black pill from this was. Well, yes, the looks test, basic looks test. I mean, that's one of the most strongly represented factors in literature, and that seems to be supported. But ultimately, for the duration of a relationship, looks don't seem to matter. Nobody really understands. Nobody, according to literature at least, understands what makes a relationship actually work in the long run.
Yeah.
It's
Judge
just
Judy. Beauty fades, but dumb is forever. Again, ultimately, if your plan is to grow old together with a woman, um, then and both sides have to acknowledge that like the looks that like maybe initially spark things, that's not what's going to keep you together. That's not going to be it. So if it's purely a superficial foundation, do not be surprised when it crumbles 10, 15 years down the road. Yeah.
yeah, and this is a fascinating topic to me because I think a lot of listen, talk to a lot of young people, and they're always talking about attractive. I don't find this person attractive, and I get it, but long term, I don't know. There might even be a trade-off. There might even be, let's say you could meet somebody. You didn't necessarily find them attractive, but on every other front, you got along well, you had common interests, whatever. That might make a better long-term partner than somebody you actually want to boink on a regular basis. Now, you'd have to make some arrangement with that aspect of things if you're not really into the person. I don't mean by saying cheating, but I don't just accept that it's just not going to happen frequently. But I think especially in today's younger Zoomers and just young people in general, it's all predicated on just pure raw attraction, and everything else
Yeah.
is derived from that. And they never think
Mm-hmm.
about the long-term consequences of that. And look, I think a lot of the young Zoomer black pillars, the kind of guys who follow wheat waffles, I mean, again, it's in a technical sense a high quality channel, and I don't blame them for being young and not necessarily having a certain foresight, but hyper focusing only on the entry aspect, as it were, right? You get okay, you looks max, you went from a 4.5 to a 6.5, you have a GF, great. And then what? When we know, for example, there's no secret formula to there is no looks maxing for a relationship because apparently, at least according to the data, it doesn't really have an effect. It's not positively or negatively correlated. It's just we don't know. And you think add to that one of the older talking points in the manosphere, which I'm sure you're aware of, something you've thought about because I know you don't want to get married, is okay. Maybe these guys do get in a relationship. The marriage laws have not changed as far as I'm aware, not really. So there's still that issue. So there's a young people in general is hyper focused on oh, attractive, attractive, attractive. Okay, that's great. But I think I've said this in a video. That's like the tip of, that's like that's like the foot of the mountain. You got to still get up to the summit. And
Yeah.
a lot of people never even get in close. They never even get to the midpoint of the mountain, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, probably one of my greatest fears, I would say, in the context of this topic is getting got. That just scares the crap out of me. I don't want to be what sometimes people who subscribe to the oofy doofy idea. We could talk about that if you like. The oofy doofy manservant, just like the dad bod schlub. That like, okay, like you said, yeah, you're not the best looking guy in the world, but we can kind of make this work. And some guys might look at that and go, doesn't matter, had sex, right? Doesn't matter. It's like, okay, fine, sure, she'll have your babies. Okay, fine, sure, whatever. But again, some men really care about that genuine desire. I personally can't imagine a relationship where I genuinely desire her and she doesn't me. Like, I can't do it. Can't do it.
Could
It's like,
you
what am I investing in?
could you
You know?
imagine a relationship though of the sort I suggest where neither of you are physically attracted to each other, but you just get along really, really well. And you discuss things and you say, well, look, we're really good friends. Maybe because we're horny every now and then we'll boink, but we recognize that there's more to this than that. Would you ever consider a relationship like that?
Well, I think honestly, again, in my experience, even if a girl, let's say a girl's like a 5, right? Again, if you really have like common values and things like this, it makes them more attractive as an overall package. Again, because just the physical looks, at least from the perspective of a guy, I think when he's considering a girl for a long-term relationship, looks isn't like the be all end all. I think for casual sex, looks is the be all end all. And I think men generally understand that layer of nuance. But again, the layers of nuance, the problem is with from the female side, the layers of nuance, women have accounted for it on their own in a first world socialized society where they can get the money themselves, they can get the status themselves, they can get all these things. So again, I think this is why you see women going for the raw looks, and if they must settle, they'll take some schlub that's just like there to like change the light bulbs and shit like this, and there might not be actually genuine desire there.
I think
And
though,
that's kind of like the two sides of it.
ultimately, Pete, schlubs aside,
Mm,
it, this is not just true of women, it's true of any human relationship.
right.
You need to open your, it sounds really gay. I guess you're not allowed to say that these days. Really gay, screw it. I'm old school, I'm old. Sounds
No,
really
so you
gay
could
and
you could
cheesy.
say it with GEH, gee,
Yeah,
not
it
GAY.
sounds really whatever. But you got to open yourself up to be vulnerable. I get something happened to me this year.
Mm,
It's not a woman, but I guess a formerly close friend of mine. I knew him for years,
mm, yeah.
and he went MIA on me, and I have no he didn't. It was just literally no message, no nothing. Uh, I I I wrote to him about 2 or 3 times. Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm really busy. But you can see he's playing games on Steam. He's not. He's busy, but he's not that busy. Like, I don't know why he did it. Maybe he just discovered some horrible quality I have, and I wasn't aware of, or maybe he just I don't know, reevaluated me. I don't know. The point is that any human relationship, whether it's a friendship, especially a relationship, you're gonna have to be quote unquote vulnerable. You're gonna have to take risks and chances, and you're gonna have to
Yep.
open yourself up to the possibility of being gotten got, or you know, I mean, look, personally, in my opinion, I can't imagine you being a schlub at all. I mean, I just can't really. I mean, first off, I don't know how good you are at changing light bulbs, but my sense is that you're not amazing at it. So that's actually an advantage. I mean, don't I'm not trying to say it's in a bad light. Actually, I'm saying that, like, I don't think a woman would want to be together because of changing light bulbs because you're not bringing that to the table anyway. So, you know, that's uh, that's an
Yeah.
advantage.
Yeah. I mean, I could change a light bulb. That's not too
Okay,
difficult to
okay.
do. But yeah, I think you're right. But yeah, again with these relationships, again, red pill in particular, they try so hard just to say like, yo, like don't show anything, this, that, and the third. It's like, how can you form a connection then, though? Like if your goal is a long, and I know a lot of these guys in this space, I know deep down they don't want to confront the trauma because it's scary, but it's like, there's a reason you're angry. There's probably a girl in your mind that makes you fume when you're consuming this content. You have to get past that. You have to get past that. Otherwise, you will never be psychologically fit to be in a relationship because being in a relationship requires you to be able to take those types of risks, calculated risks. This is why in the standard courtship model, right? You go on a few dates. You get to know each other. Is this the kind of person I should be extending goodwill to? It's meant to be opened up like in modules, layer by layer. This is the natural progression. It's like I highly doubt when my parents met, they spilled their guts to each other on day one. No, it's a natural progression. You do it over time.
Yeah.
But I also think because of social media, because of TikTok, because of the internet in general, Gen Z in particular, they were shaped and molded by it. I think millennials were like the last playing out, where like kids were like really playing outside and having natural socialization. They never learned the skills. They don't know what to do with relationships. And so, is it any surprise that these young girls who are the mate selectors, they are promoting a strategy on dating apps where it's just like very, not connected, impersonal, because it's all they know, right? So it's not surprising to me that that's what we're seeing. But yeah, I've said it before. I think what we have been seeing with these good relationships, it's kind of relics. It's relics of a bygone era, and I fear that it's not going to come back. It's only going to get worse.
Oh no, I totally
Um,
agree. It's not coming back. I mean, I actually Jesus, a couple of I think sometime earlier this year, I had no idea. I didn't. I guess my household was somewhere between yours and your friends. I mean, it wasn't really dysfunctional, but there was a lot of aggression, and fighting between my parents, and it wasn't great. And I
yeah.
found out this year that apparently my father married my mother after 6 weeks of knowing each other. I thought that was a little, maybe that's one of the reasons why it's just there was so much tension all the time. I have no idea. Uh, it was probably also the times. I mean, they were quite old. So, but yeah, I don't think that's coming back at all. I think that's just, as you like to say, it is what it is, and we have to accept the circumstances they are. Hell, I mean, put it this way: I have a friend who is in a lack of a better way of phrase, exceptionally healthy relationship slash marriage. They're technically married, I guess so. And it is so freakishly functional that it might have been back in the day when you heard about a really dysfunctional relationship marriage, you're like, damn, like, holy shit. Now it's the opposite. If someone tells you or you know about a relationship that's really good and functional and wholesome, like,
Yeah.
what the hell is that? Like, if someone says,
Yeah.
she cheated on me, and then her ex-boyfriend showed up and beat the crap, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like that's the new norm is dysfunctional, depressing, ruinous. That's the new norm. And when you do hear, well, what, you don't fight all the time, you get along, you have common goals. What the hell is that? That's the freak. That's the freakish thing now, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and like, and obviously, if you didn't grow up in that type of environment, I know 50-0-50 rule. Probably the reason why I'm like my parents has much more to do with genes than internal
Absolutely,
environment, of
absolutely.
course.
Yep.
But even my peer groups, Catholic school and stuff like this, again, I'm an atheist, but I'm not gonna begrudge the benefits of going to a private education.
No.
Um, they facilitated these things. It was just like, no, like the family is a modular unit. And I think a lot of people, again, because of this whole atomization thing, when they get into relationships, they forget that there's another person in it. You know, like ladies, it's not, he's not a Chanel bag. You know what I mean? He's not an accessory. He's a person. But men, she's not a something that's you dump all your negative emotions into. She processes it, and now like you're not sad anymore. If that's what you're looking for, get a dog. You know what I mean? Um, Relationships definitely require a very specific set of skills that mainstream Gen Z is sorely lacking. And I think the results are a reflection of that. So when you have these Gen Z people like watching Wheat Waffles and stuff, they're focusing hyper on the looks. They're setting themselves up for being potentially successful in a short-term mating strategy. But if they want a long-term mating strategy, the skills that need to be taught in order to facilitate that, they're not being taught. They're not being talked about because talking about it is soy. Talking about it is vulnerable. And again, someone like Human, again, he's more in that conversation, which, again, like I said, there might be some overlap in that regard. But again, when you kind of bring it back over to the looks conversation, I think that's kind of his blind spot. But again, that's because he's probably, a lot older than I am.
He's even
But
older than I am now. I mean,
yeah,
to that point, I
dude's been
brought
around the block.
yeah, I brought this up in a recent video. I talked about aimlessness because I talk to a lot of young people, and I know this girl actually that I'm on decent terms with. I guess we have kind of avuncular relationship. She's 18, 19, so she just asks me questions about life and whatever. I try to help her out, and
Yeah.
she's she has what you would call in the literature, I would say, low sociosexuality. So she's a bit overwhelmed by the basically what's going on. She's I mean, probably in part undoubtedly due to culture. She's Iranian, but thing is, I'd point out to her that the reason why you're seeing this confusion, your peer group, people around you, et cetera, is that people I mean, you made a video about the situationships, which are basically somewhat akin to what I'm talking about. You enter a relationship with this attitude, let's see what happens. Like, let's just hang out. Then what does hang out ultimately amount to? So, okay, you have the fuzzy, warm, fuzzy feelings. Oh, cool. So let's boink. Let's do this. Some sucky wucky, and then you just wait it out until fuzzy wuzzy's gone. And I don't like what he did, and then goodbye, right?
Pretty
Because the
much.
relationships I see that actually work, like the one that my friend has, this marriage, they definitely want at least two children. They're saving every month. They're looking to get this. I mean, it sounds boring and bland, but they do have this
Plan.
aim, right, of
Mm-hmm.
going somewhere. Now, I'm not saying it absolutely requires children, or that definitely helps, but
Mm.
have this idea of working towards something in the context of relation versus, what's up? Let's see what happens. Okay, we last a year and a half. We don't want to boink anymore. Okay, goodbye. Good luck. Like that's very, very much the standard model. And someone who's more, I guess, traditional or low sociosexuality is saying, well, what am I supposed to do with that? Because that's not because in this instance, this girl I mentioned wants something, basically a long-term partnership. I mean,
Yeah.
people your age and even a little older, they're not going to offer that because their attitude is just let's just hook up and see what happens. And another thing, I mean, I kind of sound like the crotchety old man here, but I mean, I know the youth has always thought that they have a lot of time, but it feels like the Zoomers in particular, man, have they deluded themselves into thinking they got a lot of time. I tell you, you ain't got no time. You think you do. You're gonna wake up tomorrow, you're 40. You know, what does Chris Rock say? People say life is short. No, no, it's not. It's long, especially when you make the wrong decisions. So it's kind of like this collision of both those factors. And they're just like, oh, I'll see what happens. Oh, I'm seeing this girl. Yeah, it's. I just don't. And then they're gonna regret it. I'm not just saying this to be. Oh, you're gonna regret what you did. It's just because another thing that you can see in the data. Alex Dates like brought this up, but I always tell the young people too. Your best opportunities in life. You talked about this on your channel as well for meeting people are basically, popped out of your mother's vagina to the time you finish up university. After that, if you're, a normal person, a functional person like you go to work, you have a job, you see the people there, but as you pointed out, how many of those people actually got your back? I don't know. Probably not many. And that's it. And so, as you pointed out in your recent video, you're going to have to, you want to meet up, you're going to have to literally use quote unquote meetup sites. And so these people, I feel, are just not thinking, the young people, enough about that precious interval of time they have because they're at university. People like Wheat Waffles, but not just him, just anyone really who's young, 18 to 22, basically. That's the, I remember, I don't have contact with them anymore because, time tends to roll these things, live in different places, but I met a very good friend of mine years ago sitting in a history lecture class. I think he asked me if I had gotten the notes for something because he was just trying. It just happened naturally, social interaction. You didn't have to force it. You're just there. After
Exactly.
after university, you got to force it. And work is no longer a place where you can certainly not meet people to, I mean, in a romantic setting, although that was a very common, you've talked about this too, a common feature back in the day. But even in terms of friends, people are just, people want, most of the time you want to go work, they want to just leave, and that's it. Now you're just left to
Yeah.
doing what, and hanging out at home. And the thing that I worry a lot about, even though, I make a lot of use of the internet, I basically live online, I admit that. But if anything, I should be a warning. I tell these young people, you shouldn't, don't, this is the opportunity. Don't spend all your time online. You have the opportunity now to build something that might be uh, of some duration at least. You're probably not going to get that online. I'm not saying it's impossible. Online offers a lot of unique possibilities, but take advantage of the youth and in particular the possibilities and the opportunities available that I took for granted. I mean, we all did. I remember when I was at university meeting people nonstop. I remember I used to. I mean, it was like magic, right?
They're all gone
Now
now.
it's all gone now, and I tell you, I mean, I am a hermetic person. I have been for a long time, but recently saw my massage therapist who got back problems. And pandemic, all this other stuff. She was the first real person I talked to, like IRL, in months. Which is and what happens when you spend way too much time online, like I obviously do, is it's this weird. How does this even work? Like,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
it's just this, and she's a very touchy. I mean, beyond being a massage therapist, obviously she's got to touch you. That's what she does. It's her job. She's also 6'2", very unusual for a woman. It's like a big, like an Amazon basically, but very touchy. You're just so like, what is this? And I think that these young people, the internet in a lot of ways has both spoiled and sabotaged the youth of these people because I know a lot of them that are kind of living some version of my life, which I would not recommend. Like I always tell people, you don't want to end up like me. And I'm just being honest. Like I'm not, I never claimed to be a happy person, and I'm pretty dissatisfied with my life. You don't want, but I say that's okay because I'm pushing 50. It is what it is. But you're freaking 19, 20. Well, why are you doing this? I try to tell them that, and
Yeah.
they some of them listen, but I mean, I don't even blame them because it's available. Never mind. I mean, you mentioned you're probably not getting around these books. You probably have the same issue I do. When I was young, because like I said, I'm pushing 50. Books were entertainment. I know it sounds crazy. Like people get excited about shows, video games these days. But back in my day, now I really sound like an old man. I like fantasy literature in particular. Like, oh my God, this trilogy, it's gonna finally be out. I'm gonna read it. Like lying down in bed reading a book was entertainment. And I don't read books nearly as much as I used to. It's hard. I get distracted by internet games, all that stuff. So I think the young people really, yeah, I get it. Especially the young guys, they're in this rate, this rush they need to get meet women. They want the punani. They want the fine. But just think about the idea of building long-term quality relationships, not necessarily romantic, but just interactions with people, and taking advantage of the opportunities you have now, because it only gets harder, except for your schlong, of course, as you pointed out. But you know,
Yeah.
it all gets harder, and even and then the other thing with work, as well, yeah, you of all people, because you work your butt off, you're tired. You don't have a lot of energy after work, especially if you're working that kind of job like you are.
Yeah.
you, then you gotta it's just people don't talk about it, and this is something that I increasingly this year I've been just trying to impart to the really young men I talk to, but really any young people who uh who think they just have endless time, and it's just sort of this, yeah, like just like trick or treat just throughout until they're 50 or something, and it's not, unfortunately. And sometimes it's through no fault of your own. It's just like I said, these opportunities just arise. You're sitting in a class with somebody. Um, yeah, and without that, you have to go out and make an effort, and that's hard. It's a lot harder. There's an awkwardness there, and I know you're in the process of trying to overcome yourself to do that because you realize that's the inevitable end or the inevitable aim of all this glow up stuff you've been doing is to I guess take advantage of it and sort of and exercise it. It's like a weapon, right? You want to pull the trigger eventually, right? Otherwise, you're just going to be staring in the mirror and wanking off in front of it. Well, maybe you only 4 times a week, right? But but you know what I mean, right? You want to finally, you're a smith. You finally forge a sword. You want to put it to use in battle. Well, you got to go to the meetups eventually, or you have to put yourself out there. Otherwise, you're just I guess you could just do it, but again, people want to see some kind of benefit to the discipline they engage with, some kind of, and I don't, I just, I have this feeling, and maybe I'm being, this is sort of catastrophe thinking, but a lot of these young guys, Zoomers, females too, I just think they're gonna end up in this catatonic state later on, and it's not gonna be pretty. And
No, no.
I think, yeah, so go on. I've been talking a lot, so go on.
It's okay. Yeah, I mean when the 30s hit, yeah, Gen Z, that I don't think they're gonna know what to do with it. I think millennials crashed the boat, and I think Gen Z is primed to crash their boat as well. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, when you're looking at the need to socialize, like yeah, I think they really underestimate the value of the teenage love pill, man. Like that's the window where like life is sort of serving social circles to you on a silver platter.
Yeah,
And what you should be doing is maximizing that and trying to make the best of it. Because again, in an atomized world with no sense of community, there's no neighborhoods anymore. There's no people, family vetting people for you anymore. There's none of that. You are completely on your own. The entire socialization process has been automated by the internet. So it's like, yeah, if you don't know how to kick in the old school skills and you don't have the ability to go and do that, it's going to be problematic for you. And I think also, again, I always say expectations are the root of disappointment. As Wheat Waffle says, expectations are the enemies of happiness and contentment. Again, at the end of the day, when you're looking at that, you can't expect a guarantee. There is no guarantee. I remember one of the first things I said when I walked into therapy, I was telling her, I like guarantees. Well, Pete, you're going to be disappointed because there are none. And it's like, okay, you have to kind of make your peace with the fact that, yes, there's a lot of these like subconscious rules and things that operate in our minds that when we're sizing each other up, and you're just going to have to live with that and understand that just because you put the work in doesn't mean you get a payoff. But I also understand that if your starting line is further back in the race, so to speak, yes, you're going to have a much harder time. I'm not going to act like that's not the case, just as Chris Williamson is no doubt having a way further ahead starting line from me. No doubt about that. But again, you kind of just have to look at where you stand, what your race is, and just focus on that race. Easier said than done, of course. Comparison is the thief of joy.
I literally
But
wanted to
as
ask you
you have
about that.
aptly pointed,
Yeah,
yeah, but as you have aptly pointed out, comparing yourself is almost like a natural thing that most people do. It's not something that you just turn off. It's something that you have to
yeah.
consciously think about. And you almost have to like I always talk about like the evolved brain in the back. I call that the MS-DOS, while the front part of your brain, the frontal lobe, that can kind of comprehend the Windows 11 that created the evolutionary mismatches we have today. You have to really engage that Windows 11. And you have to like be like, look, man, this is what it is. And I can't worry about what the guy next to me is doing. I have a coworker next to me. Yeah, he met his wife in the teenage love pill phase, and he's been married and with this girl for like 14 years. Good for him. That's not me. So I can't spend my time looking
Yeah.
at him. Just like when I was a kid complaining that the guy across the street from me had a Nintendo 64 and I didn't, or that my friends could stay out past the streetlights and I couldn't. I could sit there and be like, oh, that's not fair. But is it changing the fact that these are my circumstances? No. Okay, so it's an external factor. I got to like stop worrying about that.
Look, I think we're
Again,
both right about
easier said than done.
comparison. I think you're 100% right. Comparison is thief of joy. It can be, it's almost exclusively destructive in that sense.
Yeah.
On the other
Yeah. Look
hand,
at social media.
we get we understand ourselves in this world as a reflection of, to some degree, other people and evaluation. So,
Sure.
I have a friend, this hyper genius guy. Like, this guy's like the total, like he's mentioned, he's the same guy who's married, and he's so good in his field of study, he's literally a genius, that he hasn't even finished his master's degree and he's already teaching undergrad class. Like he's just other students are afraid to even ask questions because they're just terrified that he's going to mog them, right? Now, why do people know he's that good? Why the professor? Because yeah, they compared him to others. He knows. So it's a careful balance act. I agree though that you're only ever going to be just you. So
Yep.
in a the best thing to do would be to never compare yourself, but it is an instinct to know where you are in the world.
Right.
And
So, yeah, I think there's a difference though between acknowledging a benchmark that you should aspire to be, versus comparing yourself to an actual other person. Because the reality is that someone will always be better than you.
yeah,
Deal with it. Deal
yeah.
with it. Yeah.
Well, not just that. I mean, logically, everyone's starting point is different. Literally, everyone's. So
There's also that.
there's
Yeah.
no there's no way you can go. It's just the genetic cocktail, the environment, everything is just different. You can't really compare. But people tend to look at the end result, right? Which is what people, and maybe in part why Chad Williamson gets upset, because they just see, oh, Love Island, successful podcast, blah blah blah, and they don't take into account the journey of his starting point. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the reason
Yeah,
why
you
he
got to
gets.
look at both. You got to look at the journey and the destination. And look, I have empathy for the journey. I got bullied in high school too. I get it, man. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It will impart traumas
Why
on you.
did
I'm
you
not
get
saying.
bullied though? You're tall, a very tall guy.
I think what it was for me is that I was the nerd, right? And I got bullied a lot by the jocks.
Mm,
Again,
right.
people tend to, and again, that's a reflection of their insecurity at the time that they did not have the intelligence that I had. But I seemed to be largely indifferent to the fact that they were athletically superior to me. I didn't seem to care about that at the time. So I didn't feel a need to project out any sour grapes about that. But I suspect there was some sour grapes on their end, and they projected that out towards me. Again, it's crabs in a bucket. This is what comparisons of Is the Thief of Joy can do if you don't abide by that. You start looking at people, it's like, how can I drag this person down? And again, what they would do is like, again, because when you're in, when you're 14, you're still kind of like figuring out who you are, where you fit in the world. So, what do guys do? They call each other, gay, right? That's what they do. They just crap on each other and things like this. And that's how they try to cut you down to size. Ironically, though, the actual guys in my class who were gay, they never got bullied. So perhaps that again reveals another thing about those guys as well. So yeah, I think it was just classic crabs in a bucket. That's all it was. But at the end of the day, you can't be ignorant to the fact that despite the fact that, yeah, maybe at the end of the day you look back on it, you're like, I'm okay. Maybe you're not as okay as you think you are, and you have to talk about these things. But yeah, I would say it's a classic brawn versus brain type reason why I got bullied in high school. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I was bullied as well, probably for similar reasons. Just
yeah,
being weird. I've always been weird, and weirdos are not exactly accepted.
easy easy targets. I would say I had kind of weird quirks as well. Again, when you're in high school, you're trying to figure out who the hell you are, and it's not always easy to do. Again, you're going through puberty, changes are happening, you're not fully sure where you fit in the world. It's not like the days when you're in the single digits and you're just playing Pokemon Link cable battles and just chilling with the friends on the block. It was just it's a different experience in high
Spoken
school.
like a true millennial. Pokemon Link. This is alien to me, but yeah, I can imagine.
I
Well,
mean,
you
as a
still
kid, that's what we did. I mean, but we did things like we played freeze tag, we played manhunt, we played handball, soccer, basketball. We did all those things too. It's just that when Pokemon came out, like that was big, and then Yu-Gi-Oh was like the second big thing as well. So those two things were like really big in my childhood.
this is how you became a console player, an unfortunate one, a console player.
Yeah.
Eventually, you weaned yourself off of that. But
I mean, no, I play plenty of consoles even still. So
oh,
sorry to
oh,
disappoint.
that's right. I don't blame. Well, that's just my own
But I
tirade
play,
about.
I play, I play everything. I play handhelds, I play console, I play PC, I
Oh
play
wow, okay,
mobile games, everything.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is, I mean, one of the reasons I want to talk to you is, I mean, I guess you have to pay close attention to the evolution of your channel, but you've undergone, to my mind, tremendous transformation this year and last year. I mean, you started off in a different spot. I mean, you say yourself you're angrier. I mean, you said in a recent video in a gray. You have a good ability to see the gray in the world. Mm, Probably wasn't always quite as pronounced as it is now,
Yeah.
but maybe you could talk a little about this transformation. So in the past year, I think you've changed visibly. how you express yourself, how you think about things. You're much more pensive too, when you're doing your black or your whiteboard thing. So there's been a visible change to anyone who's paying attention. So how do you think this came about? What do you think the difference is?
So, I mean, I think it ultimately tied to the fact that I had an open mind to listen to other people and what they have to say. People tell me what their starting line is like, so to speak. And it allowed me to sort of have the humility to acknowledge the boons that the genetic gods have given me, but also acknowledge some of the drawbacks. And I said, okay. And I've talked about this too, like the 9 steps, like to sort of, get to the point where you need to be, acknowledging inner and outer locus of control. And then I think just making simple quality of life improvements in the looks department was a big thing. And then actually, starting to set goals for myself as well. I think people underestimate journaling. Even as a sub 5, I think journaling, just kind of getting it all out on paper and really seeing what the hell you're looking at, it could help put things in perspective for you. And then you can kind of figure out, all right, that I can't really do anything about, that I could do something about, so on and so forth. Even when you got a crappy hand, there's still cards to play. That being said, I would say probably the big growth for me, I think, was acknowledging internally that there was just a lot of negative emotion there. There were still things that I was hung up on. Um, and I talked to Human about this too. If you don't confront the monster, all you're going to do is run. Like I was definitely the guy that was just consuming tons and tons and tons of manosphere content that resonated with me at the time. But now I look at that content and I look at it and I see, like, yeah, I was just trading one plantation for another. I was trading the blue pill matrix for just another thing that reinforced my negativity and made me think like I was in the right. And it's again, like for example, take MGTOW. Again, I don't crap on MGTOW. I think it's a viable solution. But it's just that, if you're in the RV in the middle of the forest, I believe you. I believe you. But a lot of MGTOWs, I think they're not really MGTOWs. I think they want what we've been talking about here, but they either think it's not viable or they just, again, they haven't processed their emotions, which again is probably one of the greatest services that they could do for themselves. I'm
Well, I mean,
proof of this.
MGTOW, I get it in the youngest generation with MGTOW because the dynamic is so different. Somebody who's
Yeah,
age 20 now can't imagine that, I don't know, 1997, 1996, whenever that an average guy could just get a girlfriend or even hook up. It's unimaginable to him, right? It's because the way it is. There was no social media, barely was any internet.
the landscape has changed. Yeah.
Right. So, at least in my generation of so-called MGTOW, now I didn't have a ton of relationships. I had enough. I had some experience, so some went on for a few years. They weren't successful, obviously, so I guess ultimately I ended up a loser. But I had my experiences, and in my own experience, I did not really enjoy those experiences. I learned that maybe the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, or that okay, relationships aren't cracked up or all cracked up. People claim they're supposed to be, and that is maybe that's not believable. As someone who's always been basically of average looks to somebody, there's just no way. It's that hence the meme like men sent their own way. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I guess you could say the fact that I'm gonna die alone and I don't have a wife. Yeah, I guess in some sense I was sent my own way, but I had my share of experiences, and I didn't really enjoy them overall. They were very stressful, shit tests. It wasn't fun.
Yeah, and I think that's a function of lack of genuine desire, respect, and admiration, right?
Possibly, yeah.
I Yeah, I again, William Costello. There's good pizza and then there's pizza. And again, generally, women are the choosers and men they work with whether or not who chooses them. That's what they work with. And again, I think unfortunately there's a lot of men out there where they settle for just mediocre pizza.
Well, actually,
I
it's
think
funny
yeah,
you bring that up
yeah.
because one of my, okay, so one of my quote unquote relationships, it turns out, long story, but she was engaged, but her fiance was in a different country. I didn't know this, found this out much later. I was the interesting guy she actually desired, but because I was so unstable and so unambitious, she decided to go with the oofy doofy guy, really boring, but reliable, straight shooter type of guy. She literally told me, like, no, I actually like you more, and I believed her because I mean, no, but she kind of showed it. But she wanted to pop some kids out, and she just realized that this bum over here, as cool as he is, at least in her eyes, he's not going to exactly be. He's not going to be earning enough money and this and that. So yeah, in one instance, it was actually the case of I just wasn't stable enough. But yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, the funny thing is, in some cases they did. It's just my very first relationship was 19, and she definitely really was into me, and I was really into the cooking and the copulation. Let's put it that way. But she was a nutcase. Tried to chop my weenie off and run me over the car. So you know, it's not always black and white, but sure.
It's amazing. It's amazing what not being accustomed to being told no will make you do. Yeah, but I would just say one layer to that though. Probably again, if she's looking at him like oh, he's got the money and this, that, and the third. That's not really un oofy doofy. And oofy doofy is more like, hey, she has her own money and status,
Right, gotcha.
so she's just kind of like, well, I just kind of need someone to copulate with and have kids so I can fulfill my reproductive whatever. Again, all operating in the MS DOS, of course, but that's kind of what drives her. And that in combination with social trends sort of saying, what's in, what's not, what is the Chanel bag, right? And it just seems to kind of be this dad bod thing, which is why you see all these videos like, oh, do you prefer the fit bod or the dad bod? Like the whole reason that like those videos are trending and stuff is because again, this oofy doofy stuff. But that's a whole nother
I mean,
tangent.
the reality is unless you're, I don't know, like 8.5 gigachad, even then, everyone who's had relationships has had relationships that didn't work out, and part of it's on them. Of course, I don't think I'm very good in relationships. Let's set aside the fact I'm just average looks, I'm poor, or whatever. Let's set that aside.
Yep,
I kind of like doing the things I want to do, right? I'm
correct.
okay with compromising, but to the point where the person says, "No, you can't do this," or "Why?" Like gaming, right? I like to game. Yeah, yeah, cope. Yeah, so is life. Whatever. Okay,
Right.
well, why are you gaming? Like, sure, they're game girls these days, but many of them back in the day were not. So why are you doing that? So even setting aside things like I'm not amazing looking, I'm not wealthy, whatever. I just that whole dynamic of kind of subordinating my will and desires to somebody else, and maybe that's also another part of the process. That's how it felt. It never felt like, oh, let's just do this, or I'll do my thing, you do your thing. It always felt like this almost painful compromise you had to make just for the sake of box or whatever, or just buying peace almost with arguments, like saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're right about X, Y, Z because, well, just because you want peace and quiet."
Yeah.
Maybe it's true that if I were, 6'3" Chad, none of that would have happened. Probably, I don't know. But the point is, that's an experience a lot of guys have, and most men aren't 6'3" Chad. So, um, you know, to look at the whole, are you been sent your own way? I guess partly I have been, but I did my experiences as well. And what about the guys who are, MGTOW who are married and have kids? I guess they were sent their own. I mean, at some point in time, it's almost a bit of a meme, and most of the guys who say that are just ultra really young, and they're not taking into
Yeah.
account all the factors as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another layer to it though, especially like with the divorced guys. Them I can understand why they adopt that lifestyle because they lament what was lost. They lament the again because divorce is a very traumatic experience.
Mm,
But they lament the old model of enforced monogamy that's kind of dead now. But
kind of,
yeah,
yeah, just kind of.
in regards yeah, in regards to the video games and all that stuff. Yeah, I always kind of draw the line between standards and boundaries, right? It's like anyone who has some sense of emotional maturity can understand that yes, there are going to be some things we have to trade off on. Because again, women they look at you playing video games all the time and they're like, "Well, don't you want to spend any time with me?" And it's like, "Okay, fine. It's reasonable to want your partner to spend some time with you, but again, if you're just flat out saying, "Hey, no, this isn't a standard. This is a boundary. If you play video games, we're done." It's like, "Well, then yeah, you're not my girlfriend. Just get out of my house." Um, you have to be reasonable because obviously she has interests, you have interests and stuff like this. But I think we have this society where, again, because of all this gassing up on the internet, people sort of treat their standards like their boundaries. Like, oh, you're not 6 foot tall, boundary violation. Oh, you don't make six figures, boundary violation. It's like, no, those are standards. You're supposed to trade those things off. It's like, oh, I don't get 100% of what I want. Okay, you bring 80% of what I want. And statistically speaking, that's probably better if I were to go out there and just keep trying to find something better. But again, when you're on the internet, you're being gassed up and simped for all the time. You tend to think like, nah, I can always do better. And that's a harsh reflection of what you're seeing in the real world today. That being said, though, I just wanted to again bring up another interesting fact about the Oofy Doofy stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Vaknin. I watch his stuff sometimes.
No, I don't know.
Um,
Don't know.
so yeah, that's Vaknin. Feel free to check him out if you want. He actually talked about this phenomenon where it's actually like a lot of these schlubs that like they are kind of getting one night stands and things like this. They actually have been somewhat successful because again, though, women are trying to bargain with their bodies to lock down these guys. And now like they're starting to like catch up and figure out like, well, no, I can have a short-term mating strategy, and that's even creating more frustration on the female end. But it's like, listen, you're overplaying your hand. There's a price to pay for that. And I think in the context of relationships, whether you're talking something like that all the way up to when you're actually in the relationship, again, people can't delineate between standards and boundaries. And that's why, again, you're having this problem where like your girlfriend's telling you like you can't play any video games at all, and you're looking at that like, well, you're clearly violating what matters to me, and it doesn't seem you give a shit. You only care about what I can do for you, and that's where things fall apart. um yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are ancient examples because I think these days the video game thing would probably be
It's gotten
treated.
worse. It hasn't gotten better. So if anything, today, magnify what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, well, sure, but I mean, I think
Yeah.
that everyone in air quotes is a gamer these days. Like, who doesn't play some kind of game, right? I mean, in fact, you're a freak if you don't, and
Mobile
maybe like
games don't count.
mobile game. Not in my opinion, don't.
They don't count.
Which
If
is
you
why
remove
when people
that,
talk about
then
women
yeah.
gamers, well, that reduces the number significantly because
Yes, it does.
yeah, the women gaming are yeah. Okay, well, let's get rid of the mobile games. But so it's that kind of a remarkable thing. I don't think a woman these days would complain per se, but oh, you play video games, well, everyone does. Probably the amount of time spent, whatever, that probably be an issue. Back in my day, of course, video games, playing video games was equated to being a loser, right? So it's kind of, what are you doing? And I remember, actually, you're a Mass Effect fan. Like, I just was a lot more interested in playing Shepard and going on the missions than dealing with her and her whinging, complaining all the time at times. So yeah,
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. Again, just just as social media can trick a woman's MS-DOS into believing that she has psychological security by being validated. Video games can trick us psychologically as well into generating a positive Matthew effect loop because if we beat a level in a video game, success. Okay, next level, beat it, success. And almost, I don't want to say subconscious, but almost subconscious, like a woman's looking at that and thinking, well, why are you doing success in this game when you could be doing success in the real world? So again,
well,
I think, yeah, there's a lot of things I think that are like under the radar, like, but because of communication and lack of relationship skills, they can't say it in a way that men can understand. They can't translate the womanese to the menonese and vice
I
versa.
have to offer
We have
some
our own
counter
languages.
here, though, Pete, because I agree with you that there's that kind of simulative effect is occurring in the video games, but it's not just that. I mean, it's a Mass Effect. I mean, you're familiar, I'm familiar. Have a
Yes.
lot of games in common. That's one of them. I- Mass Effect isn't just about being a level. It's about something being something really important, right? And not just something really. Whatever you're gonna do in life, 99% chance that you're never gonna be as important as Commander Shepard.
No.
You're never gonna have a bro like fucking Garrus. I know
Nope.
you like Ashley, screw her, but you're never gonna have a chick like Liara. Like Liara is an alien for a reason, both because she looks like one and she acts like one, right? You know, that's the fact. The reason why I say this all that people play video games is because it's not just a pure substitute one to one. Like, why aren't you going out in the real world? So I don't know, work your job and then commute and waste money on subway fare and especially these days we're getting pushed on the tracks on the fucking NYC subway separate subject, but you know what I mean. Um, when you can be literally the guy attempting to save the freaking galaxy, or right now I'm playing a game where I'm literally becoming an immortal lich and I can quite literally raise people to become my undead servants. I mean, there's nothing like that in real life. It just doesn't
Right.
exist. So
But what I'm trying to say is that your MS-DOS brain can't understand that that's not equal to success in the real world.
No,
Of course,
I can. Well, okay. Maybe I'm an
no,
exception. I
no,
certainly.
but here's the thing. Your cognitive brain, the front, can understand Windows 11. It understands that yes, this doesn't equal this. But on a subconscious level, there was no video games in the ancestral environment. So what I'm trying to say is that it does trick your brain, but again, if you don't have a GF, who gives a shit, right? Do what you want. But
Right.
I'm just saying, like, yeah, like the real world success can't compete with you being a fucking lich king. Like it
Yeah.
can't compete,
No, it
right?
can't. It can't.
So again, that's kind of I think why the chemicals released in your brain, like why it's released in that way, and possibly why we feel that way. Because and this is why when a woman who never plays video games can't possibly fathom that, she comes up to you and she's like, "Hey, cut back on the video games." But you're like, "But it makes me feel good." Like, why do I have to cut back? But it's like obviously if you're in a relationship and you cultivated the relationship skills, you can be like, "All right, fine, I'll play 2 hours a day instead of 6 or 8." You try if you give a shit. If you don't give a shit, like whatever. But I'm saying like that's probably from her perspective how she feels. She looks at it like if he can't compromise and at least cut back on the hours, then like you're kind of the asshole. But if she's just saying like, hey, don't play at all, or we're done, she's the asshole. It's like
Yeah.
it's give and take.
Yeah.
But people have forgotten that, especially Gen Z.
Well, yeah. The Zoomers are. It's.
Different beast
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. I'm not going to make a specific prediction, but it doesn't seem.
to bode well.
It's look. It's yeah. It doesn't seem to bode well. It's looking grim,
Yeah,
and yeah. There's not. Well, I certainly can't do very much. I mean, I also see there's a kind of. I get, and maybe this is a good point, a final talking point, but I noticed this was brought up in your interview with well, that guy we're talking about, how increasingly they're sort of older, quote unquote, red pill guys who are talking about black pill topics. And I have to say for myself, I've taken the time to understand, like I think I have, at least I'm deluding myself into thinking
I'd
that,
say yeah.
to understand, yeah, just sort of the Zoomer's plight. I'm obviously not a Zoomer. I know it's different. And I openly say, look, I'm pushing 50, but if you were to put me back in a 20, even 25-year old, I would be struggling a lot more than I did back then because
Correct.
the market's different. I'm 5'8", I'm average looking. Maybe at my very, very best when I was, in better shape and I haven't lifted in years now, but I was six, maybe 6 point, whatever. Man, I could have gotten something maybe, but it would have been much more of a struggle versus just at some point in time. I remember, I think the most success I ever had was in my late 20s, the best shape of my life. I was lifting a lot. Yeah, and it just didn't require much effort. I was doing a master's degree. Just meet, yeah. So would it be a lot hard? Yeah, and I acknowledge that. But I also think that you don't always want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, because some experiences are radically different doesn't mean that there isn't a kernel of wisdom or something you can learn from older generations. And I think there's this note, the Zoomers, they know what's up, but I also think a lot of them unintentionally or intentionally are smart alecks. They're just sort of like, well, I don't need to listen to you because you're from this other generation, or you ended up like this, or I think you
Every
can learn something.
generation does that.
Yeah, but they're worse, I think. I really think they're worse.
Well, yeah, because again, they think like I could just Google everything.
Yeah.
But I can tell you like for a fact, working in a pharmacy, right? That's where I was before that. Talking to older people is probably one of the most eye-opening and insightful things you can do. It absolutely is. And even
Yeah.
online, like I'm 32, you're pushing 50, and Human's even older than both of us.
Hmm.
You know, talk to these people, listen to what they have to say. They can show you like a whole different experience. Nobody's got the whole picture. So it's like,
No.
okay, I'm gonna go talk to a bunch of people. And I had a subscriber email me, and he kind of like described what it's like to be a black man in America. As a white guy,
Yeah,
how the hell am I gonna know that,
I
right?
listened to that
You come
story.
and explain that to me, it's like, wow, that's a really eye-opening experience because like the culture you grew up under, the neighborhood you grew up in, totally different. Yet we're both in. I think he said he was. I don't know if he said he was in New York, but he was like in an urban area, and
Hmm.
it's like wow, that's like a totally different experience from what I had. But again, if you're just gonna assume and have like what I like to call a charlatan mindset, where you just think like, hey, I got it all figured out, you don't have to tell me anything. Again, when those 30s come around, who's gonna have the last laugh? Probably the people that you scoffed at. 10 years prior. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's part of it. They're empowered by the internet, so you can basically Google everything. The funny thing is that, understandably, despite all the knowledge being available at their fingertips, at least theoretically, most people tend to take advantage of it because they use the internet for entertainment and for their shits and giggles. So it's
much.
yeah, they're not. It's not like they're, I don't know. I really want to understand the rain cycle. I'm going to study meteorology in my spare time now. Like, that's not what they're doing. Uh,
Yeah, most people don't do that.
no.
But again, this is reflected by the fact that most people will leave a comment on something. You could literally do a Google search to prove that what they're saying is BS. And it's
Yeah.
like it didn't even occur to them like, "Hey, go to the Google search engine. Look it up."
Well,
Like it's like, yeah,
yeah, and then there's the other thing, and I can't really let this particular issue go, is that, I mean, I think everyone has a certain degree of ideological commitment. Everyone has an inclination, right? I mean, despite, for example, you not being technically religious, you retain a lot of attitudes which would be correlated with religiosity, or at least people who are traditionally religious, I'd say.
true.
Even after I got you to finally concede there's no such thing as free will, you still want people to pretend that they're stuff like that, right? So, there's stuff like that. So you brought up Kuv Studio, the guy who does these sort of or I guess it's a team, right?
Yes.
Uh, The perfect example of another way that the internet is not just gets hijacked. I mean, the guy is an incredible ideologue. He put out a video recently about eye color, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna listen to this because it usually has good information.
Right.
And he claimed that eye color preference is purely social, and and they talked
No.
about, or well, I know it's not. I've looked extensively into the data over the years. I know a lot about this. One of my older videos about a sword of mating, I literally bring up a preference for, blue-eyed men who want blue-eyed women for paternity insurance, and I even, well, apparently hyperlinks are not allowed on YouTube, so I almost got in trouble for that. I did offer a bunch of links, but he claimed that this arose from colonialism. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, this is part of it, and it happens in the manosphere too. There's a lot of ideology in the manosphere. What I like about your channel is you're committed to, I hate this word, the truth, right? You're committed to the facts as best as you can understand them, right? You're
You
not
must
there.
separate. You must
Yeah.
separate identity from idea, or you will never be able to update your beliefs. This is why, I'm open to changing my mind because I'm not committed to an idea like it's a fundamental part of who I am. Look at someone like Koobs. It's like, dude, I could pick up the book. Why beautiful people have more daughters. I did a review on that. Probably my longest video I ever did. It talks about it. Think logically. Why are light colored eyes more attractive? Because as a man, I can look at a girl with blue eyes. I can more easily see her pupils dilated, so I can determine if
Well,
she's interested in me
it's
or
part
not.
of it, but more importantly, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a soft form of paternity assurance because
There's
if
also that too. Yeah.
you're, well, this was the first discovery years ago. This in Norway. I was one of the first people to talk about, as far as I'm aware, on the YouTube sphere. Yeah, they did studies. They found, yeah, and women have no such preference. Shocking. Well,
Plus
as,
maternity assurance is guaranteed.
yeah,
Correct.
mommy's baby, his maybe, right? So
Precisely.
it's, and so but that's that's one of the reasons why I think, quite literally, one of the best YouTube channels out there. You're committed to just understanding things, updating yourself, and yeah, I think it's a great thing. Not a lot of channels like that. Not a lot of people like that. They kind of have their ideological starting point, and they try to fit everything into that. They kind of cram everything into that, and they get kind of disappointed, blown away, and then they double down their positions when they find something that might not jive too well with that, and that's always an issue. But you're not like that. I really, I try to endorse your channel, but I wish more people were interested because I think it offers so many, let's say, unique perspectives, but the approach is unique and the format's great, and I think, you know, props to you for being as open as you are. I could never be. I'm way too much of a private person, but that's also a fantastic element to it, as I'd say. But you've done just a real bang up job. If only that were something people were more interested in. I mean, I know you're not making money off
I
your
don't think
channel,
it's
but
that. I don't think it's that. I think people definitely are interested. I think the YouTube algorithm is not
oh
interested.
well.
That's what I think.
Yeah, well, tell me about it.
But that's not that I don't care because for me it was never
Yeah,
about the following. It was never about that.
yeah.
But again, the more people who do follow, the more interesting the discussions get. That I will concede, and it has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get that, but I think if you have not subscribed to that Chad Pete, who's always invited to gatherings, the Chad Slayer, you should. I'll be linking his channel in the low bar. Do you have any things you want to discuss before we close up here, or do you feel? Because I never really see you. I mean, I've watched a couple of interviews. You're always the guy who gets questions posed to him, rarely the other way around. I mean, I don't know why that's the case, but
Well, I think that's because of just how they frame it. They say like, "Hey, I'd like to interview you." But I think that's kind of why. But no, I mean nothing really comes to mind. I think we covered quite a bit, and I'm sure that as things progress, um, I admit there's going to be video slowdown. I have said this, but book reviews every now and again as I get more time. But there's things in my personal life I have to do first.
obviously,
Articles from time to time. I think like I've covered a lot of the topics that I want to. I think I've given a very good base set for most people, and with the comments, it's a good time to join the channel because you could just talk to other people and see other viewpoints. But I'm sure even beyond this, we will no doubt reconvene and have a conversation in the future again because, life's an ever changing process, right?
yeah. Okay, good. I'll be linking Pete's channel in the low bar. Go check it out. If you're not familiar, I think you're in for a treat. You have basically a library, many videos. You can see a person transform over time in terms of his attitudes and other ways too. The great glow up. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, and thanks to Pete for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stars. Always a pleasure.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.